Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laura Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is Tuesday morning, August the 30th, at 6 o'clock here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta. I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. I'm just putting the chat room open right now and getting ready for the show here. I appreciate everybody who's tuning in to my shows live and archived. I'm not a counselor or therapist. I'm just a private citizen paying to do my own shows. I like to say that on every show, just in case somebody's listening for the first time. And you have to listen to my shows at your own discretion because I'm talking about abuse, and abuse is a sensitive subject. It might bother people. It could trigger survivors who are just starting out on their healing journey. So it's really important for you to know, that you have to listen at your own discretion, right, and make sure that you're comfortable listening to these types of topics, because I don't sugarcoat it. I just tell it like it is. So you have to be aware of that. And young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, because you have to have an adult listen to the show with you, and that way they can help you make a decision whether you should be listening. Because I'm not sure how young the people are who are listening to my show, and there is a lot of adult content on my shows. So I just think it's important that children are protected at all times, and young people. So if you're under the age of 18, just to have an adult listen to a show with you, they can sort of help you decide whether it's age appropriate for you, right? So thanks, everybody. We're going to get right into this. We're looking at Robert Burney's web pages probably for about the last 3 months, I'd say. I'm really getting a lot out of it because it's the inner child healing work, and that's what I'm doing right now. And so it kind of correlates with my healing journey, right? And so I hope people are finding Robert Burney's stuff interesting. I know that some of what he's saying is a little bit over my head, but Robert Burney is he's a codependence therapist. He's also a grief counselor. He's an author. He's written a book called Codependence: The Dance of Wounded Souls, which I have the book. A friend of mine sent the book to me, which is awesome. And so he's got some great info here. Like on his website, if you go to his site index, that's from www.joy2meu.com. You can see if you go to his site index, his whole all of his works will be there. And he's written a lot, like not just for this website, but for so many other websites. His stuff is really just everywhere, and he's written a whole lot. And so, you may find something else there that you can relate to and that you want to look at. There's relationship stuff, codependency stuff, boundary information, as well as inner child healing work, and there's a whole lot more. I mean, when you look at his stuff, you can see that he's written so much, and I think he talks about his own healing journey and the process of healing from codependency and dysfunctional beliefs and attitudes and things like this. And I think that so many people are dealing with this. And so it's very helpful for me, so I hope you will check it out. That's joy2meu.com, Robert Burney's webpages. So right now we're looking at the last part of the third process for the inner child healing work that Robert Burney has here. And it's called the recovery process for inner child healing through the fear. And that's the last part of this, but there's another page that kind of correlates with it. It's called codependence versus counterdependence, and so I want to look at that because I know some of the stuff on the counterdependent stuff really look like something that I sort of relate to, so I want to kind of go through that too. But first we're going to finish this page. So we're all the way down towards the bottom, and we're looking at clarity through processing. And so he was talking about by acknowledging fear, actually speaking out my fears, Robert Burney says, out loud or writing about them often diminishes them. I can own the fear and then accept it and move through it. And he says, so anything that he was afraid of, procrastination or just, these fears that were sort of driving his day-to-day work, which was to write articles and to write, he's a therapist, he's a counselor, so he writes and he does a lot of writing to try to help people, and he was finding that some of his own fears were getting in the way of him doing his work, and that's because he was having a hard time with the material. And he said that what he did was he just started to write about the fear, and he started to talk out loud or write about it. He said that really helped him. And he says, I diminished some of the fear by speaking it out loud, in this case writing it, and I got in touch with how many attitudes were adding to the fear, and then I could take some action to let go of the attitudes that were amplifying the resistance. I could do some work to surrender my way of doing things so that I could stop creating emotional resistance by trying to control the outcome. So because he was basically holding himself back. I think that so many of us may do that in our healing process. I've heard about that, like resistance to certain things survivors may have because it's just self-protection. It's self-protective measures, right? So I guess the ironic thing, the silly part of it, was that the real right-on reason for my resistance was not even in the areas I was looking at directly. The real reason for my resistance was that the article I was writing was not working in the structure I was trying to force it into. And what would have been the best thing to do would have been to walk away from the article completely for a period of days so I could come back to it with a fresh perspective. And then he goes on to talk about he says the adventure of recovery keeps getting different. So he says the dance of balance is continuously changing, shifting, expanding. He says one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is to not take it all so seriously, not take ourselves so seriously. He says, don't worry, be silly, is a motto my higher self communicated to me many years ago. So he says, instead of worrying about doing it right, instead of empowering our fear of consequences, instead of trying to force outcomes, it is much better to lighten up, dark to light, heavy to light, because that helps us see with more clarity. And he says, the inner child healing process is a journey from dark to light, from serious to silly. As long as we are denying our fear, it has power to drive us to compulsive or addictive behavior. So if we're not seeing the multiple levels of our fear clearly, he says, then we are not being honest with ourselves. And the only way to take power away from that fear is to own it, honor it, take action to dissolve the levels of it that are codependent. And when we're seeing our fear more clearly, we can see that a lot of it is pretty silly. So he says, fear is not bad or wrong. It is not the absence of love, or some spiritual teachers and authors tell you. He says, except in the metaphysical sense, the illusion is caused by an absence of separation from love. He said it's an integral part of being human. So it is because we are afraid that we need to learn to love ourselves. So the more we learn to love ourselves, the less power the fear will have to define our reality. That's true, because what he's talking about in the first couple of pages a lot was kind of like the fact that we really shame and judge ourselves a little bit too harshly a lot of times. Most people do. Whether you were abused as a child or not, many people will be their own worst critics and enemies because they're just too hard on themselves. And then they start the whole shame, blame, guilt type thing that they may have experienced as a child. And then before you know it, they're feeling down, and it's like, oh yeah, I knew I was just this or I was just that. And then it's just a cycle. And we just keep ourselves on this, shaming, blaming, judging cycle of we're just too hard on ourselves. We're all human, right? And we all need to be able to relax and do the human thing. And nobody's perfect, and we're working towards that. I think that most people are working towards learning, really, and learning how they can have, these better situations and relationships, and better relationships with themselves, even, you know what I mean, or with the higher power, whatever they believe in, And so I think that people are really, like I know myself, it's real easy for me to start judging myself, and even though I don't blame myself for the abuse that I suffered as a child and all this, I don't have problems with guilt in that area at all, which is great. I think that's why I'm able to do a lot of what I do, is because I know where the blame goes. I know exactly where it goes. But what I have to do is not beat myself up over things that, really have no control over, and I need to be able to just relax and be a human being. I'm going to get things wrong. I'm going to do things wrong, and that's all there's to it. I'm going to have to learn how to accept that, and so many people in society really can't. I mean, I've heard people, especially people like teachers and bosses and people who have authority and who have some sort of knowledge base, and for some reason they convince themselves that they're so smart that they never make a mistake. So then they think nobody else around them should be allowed to make a mistake. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times their own issues show up in the way that they teach, or the way that they boss other people, like the way that they because what is a boss? I mean, a boss is a leader. A boss is somebody who leads the team, so which means they're part of the team. Right? But so many times the boss will keep themselves separate, and they will just boss and push the team around, trying to force an outcome instead of being part of the team and finding the answers together. You can always tell a really good boss and a really good leader because they will be in the trenches with everybody else, and they will recognize some mistakes made, and they'll say, oh, well, we need to move forward with this. Let's just learn from what we did, I mean, there is really good bosses out there. I've had some really good bosses in my lifetime. To know the difference between a really good boss and a really horrible boss. And I mean, bosses are people too, right? But sometimes they forget that. They almost take on a hero, a godlike, like I'm so good because I'm the boss. I've been a boss too, so I know what it's like to be on that side of it, and I know what it's like to treat people with dignity and respect, and not to shame and blame and judge. You know what I mean? People do make mistakes, and so that's how I expect to be treated when I'm working with somebody, right? So whoever it is in life could easily, do this whole thing of, oh, you got to be, you got to be ashamed of yourself because you're human. You made a mistake, or you just, in their mind, judging and blaming and shaming. Well, we could easily do that to ourselves too. Same thing, forcing outcomes and saying, oh, well, I should be here by now, and how come I'm not? And this just proves who I am, And people are so hard on themselves. It's absolutely ridiculous. We really have to just try to learn from our mistakes, really. I mean, that's the best thing because, that's how you learn. You know what I mean? Like, you can't really learn anything until you do it wrong. You can think you know what you're doing when you're doing it right, but you never really learn it until you do it wrong. And so that's what I've heard, and I've actually experienced that in my lifetime just about every time. So I don't have a problem with doing things wrong. You know what I mean? I really don't, because I just try to learn from it, and I just know that down the road I'm going to make a lot more mistakes. So I'm not going to beat myself up over it. So, there's all these things that we just got to be careful what we're doing, as adult survivors of child abuse, especially because we've already had a hard enough time, trying to get over things and try to deal with things without beating ourselves up. And so many survivors will do this. And they'll do it on a daily basis, if not an hourly basis, right? We have to just not do that, you know what I mean? And we have to learn how to accept ourselves and how to love ourselves and work through this stuff, you know what I mean? Work through these fears. He says, because like he says, the more we learn to love ourselves, the less power the fear will have to define our reality. So the more recovery tools we have, the sooner we will catch ourselves when we get caught up in the disease dynamics. And the less we are reacting to life out of black and white, right and wrong, the less we are judging and shaming ourselves, the less fear we experience. We can learn to love or feel love and compassion for our inner child wounds instead of fear, instead of shame and judgment. So this is the issue. I know when I started looking at inner child healing, it was a while back now when I was looking at it. I didn't start the work. I just looked at it and I thought, inner child, I knew I had an inner child. I could always feel this inner child within me there was all of these things, angry and hurt and upset and fearful and frightened and mad and raging a lot of the time. And I thought, wow, I have this inner child that I really need to get in touch with, And I wasn't necessarily ashamed of it, or afraid of it. I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't really understand how it worked. So I started looking into the inner child healing work, and this has been a while. I just didn't work on it. But I was reading about it, and I thought, there's nothing to be ashamed of. This is not our fault. You know what I mean? We didn't do this to ourselves. It's not my fault that my inner child is screaming and raging and so wounded. I didn't do that to myself. You know what I mean? And so there's no shame in it. You know what I mean? And it doesn't make me feel like I'm crazy because I feel like I have this inner child. So what I started to do is because I know who was crazy. My parents and my brother who abused me were absolutely crazy. I was fine until they got a hold of me. So this is the thing. It's really pretty sad. But people will, just not allow themselves to heal because they have so many fears. So what I did was I thought, well, I'm not afraid of this inner child stuff, so I'm going to just face it head on and see what it's all about, because I know there's too many people that have worked through their inner child healing, and it's a perfectly okay thing for them to do, so why isn't it not a perfectly okay thing for me to do? So I started doing some inner child healing work, and I realized that there was more than one. There's a whole bunch, right? And I didn't even recognize that. I just saw this one, and that's the only one that I was really in touch with. And then I started to see two as I was going along. I thought, wow, okay, there's two. And I thought, that's no surprise, right? Then I thought, oh no, as soon as I started doing the work, there was a whole bunch. I mean, there's all kinds of them, and that's all the places in my life where I got stuck, where the trauma was too much, and that child was wounded. That was me, and that's all the points where I that's where I got stuck. So that trauma will replay. It just hits the replay button all the time, and it just goes around and around and around. I don't have the same kind of flashbacks that I used to have because I'm 4 years into my healing journey, but I still have some. I don't have the same amount of nightmares, but I still have some. And the issue is I probably always will. But I'm learning how to deal with them, and that's great, right? So I mean, we don't have to feel shame and fear and guilt because we were abused as children. I mean, come on. Like, these people did this to us. We have every right to seek help. We have every right to seek healing. We have every right to reach out to those around us that would be supportive, and those that are not supportive, not hurt them because of it. Sometimes people just cannot deal with this stuff. Their makeup's not ready for it. They may be survivors themselves and not talking about it. Lots of people have been abused and they don't want anybody to know. So they can't even reach out to you, because if they do, it might show that they were abused, and then then their secret will be blown, right? And so, it's not for us to judge and blame people because they can't help us on our healing journey. What we need to do is find people who will and who can and who are ready to do that, because there are a lot of people out there that are totally willing to do it and willing to support people through it. But you have to look, and you have to be very diligent, and you have to reach out first. I mean, that's what I realized 4.5 years ago. I was like, man, well, this was really April, when I started, April 2007. So, I mean, I really realized that I thought, man, I'm going to have to do this. I'm the one that's going to have to reach out, because nobody even realizes that I'm coming home from work wanting to kill myself. So how are people going to reach out to me? Like, I look fine during the day at work, everything's fine. I come home and I'm the same old Laurie Smith. I got to face myself, you know what I mean? And like, one woman at work, this place I used to work a long time ago, back when I was in my 30s, I got a job working at this really cool restaurant, and this woman was, I ended up working with that company for about 11 years, but this woman was saying something about the fact that she thought that I was afraid of her. She says, "Oh, you're afraid of me, aren't you?" For some reason. I don't know why she even said that or why she would have said that to me, but sometimes you just never know why people say things. She was working in the kitchen with me. She was one of the cooks, actually. She was a supervisor. And I said, no, actually, I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of myself. She just looked at me like, what? Because she had no idea that I was going home ready to kill myself at night after work, So this is the issue. Like, I mean, I didn't, it's not that I was really afraid of anybody else. I'm really just afraid of myself, that I'm not going to allow myself to heal, and I'm not going to allow myself to do the right things by myself, because I'm really the only one that can do it, So I got to remember not to let myself down. And so, I started to reach out, and I was like, man, I got to reach out. So that took another 10 years for me to do that. So, I mean, I didn't start reaching out till I was in my 40s, 41 years old. But it's because I couldn't stand it anymore. I thought, how long am I going to have to be in pain like this? How long can I suffer this? I mean, this is ridiculous. Into my 40s, I never thought I'd live to see 30, and now it's another, 11 years of misery, And I was able to have a good time with people. But at the end of the day, I was still who I was. The same old person with the same hurts, the same wounds, the same feelings, right? And so that's why, and the same knowledge, right? The same everything. So I thought, okay, I have to change this. So that's what I've been doing. And it's a bit of a long journey, obviously, but I don't think this is something you can do overnight. I know I couldn't. Maybe there's somebody out there that can, and that's good for them. For me, it's just as it goes, and I'm not putting pressure on myself. Some things I'm looking at, some things I put away for later, some things, I just kind of go with it. I just go where it takes me. It's a journey, right? So I don't put pressure on myself to try to do this or try to heal or try to do this. I just work through what I need to work through. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I figure I've got the rest of my life to get through this stuff. So I'm not pushing it, you know what I mean? And so therefore it doesn't put any pressure on me, which is great, because I don't need pressure. I really don't need any more pressure, you know what I mean? Like, I've got enough pressure on me now. So that's where I'm at with that, and I hope that people will remember that. We certainly didn't deserve, what we got as children. We certainly didn't deserve, to be treated like that. And so we have to learn how to love ourselves, right? We really do. And by loving ourselves, we have to learn how to be our own best advocate. We have to learn how to be our own best friend, the one who's going to be there for ourselves, Now, because so many people will hurt other people. And so many people will not be interested in your journey, in my journey. So many people will not care if we heal or not. We can't leave it up to somebody else. So many people will not love us. We have to love ourselves. I started doing that 4 years ago. I started doing some positive affirmations. And I thought they were kind of silly because, all my life I thought positive affirmations were kind of stupid. That was just my thoughts on it, because I thought, well, that's just silly to stand there in the mirror saying, oh, I love myself and all this. And probably what it was just I couldn't stand the thought of me having to say that I love myself. And I didn't really like the idea, but I started doing it 4 years ago, and I thought, even though I don't want to do this, I'm going to do it anyway. So I started looking in the mirror in the bathroom, saying, I love myself. I do love myself. And I would go through this every day, quite a few times during the day. So it was a period of time where I was off work and in between contracts, because I sort of do contract work. It's what I've been doing for a long time. And I was just like, okay, I do love myself. I love myself. I do love myself. See, contract work's easy for me. I don't have to get into any relationships that way. It's like I can leave if I want to, right? This is a whole protection measure for myself. Everything I do is based on how safe am I. If I get a regular job, not a contract job, well, that just means that what? What does that mean? I might get stuck there, If I don't like it, I'll be stuck there, sort of thing, right? So contract jobs are great for me because it's like, well, if I don't like it, I only got about another 6 months to go, and this type of thing, right? So it's all based. Everything I do is based on me trying to protect myself, right? So I'm trying to learn how to change that. So, but yeah, I would stand in the mirror and I would do these affirmations, positive affirmations. I would really tell myself that, I do love myself. I do love myself, and I would go through it. And then after a while, I thought, I do love myself. That's very true, right? And then I would say things like, I'm not a bad person. I did not deserve what happened to me. These types of things, because this is what was running around in my head. I thought, I'm not a bad person. I did not do this to myself. I didn't cause myself this grief. This was put on me by my abusers, and I said, I need to learn how to feel differently about myself. So I'm not a loser. I'm not a whore. I'm not a slut. I'm not this. I'm not that. All the stuff that the tapes were playing around in my head, I started to negate that. And it really did help after a while. I started to feel better. I started to think, what, I do love myself. What it did was it empowered me to continue to love myself. It just gave me it just reminded me that some sort of pathway in my brain that, hey, I do love myself. So now I don't have any problems with that at all. I still have the tapes playing in my head. And sometimes, some days, actually I probably hear them at least once a day. And the sad thing is that it's a lot of times when I feel like I'm not doing something right, or I've done something wrong, or I've hurt somebody, or I've done something that just wasn't, or maybe just because I don't have a job yet. And all of a sudden, like the tapes will play and it's my mother's voice again. You're just a whore. You're a slut. You're this. You're that. Right? Horrible, horrible stuff. And the way that she would say it to me, you know what I mean? And the anger and the hatred in her voice, you know what I mean? Like she just pounded into me, and it's like, that stuff is stuck. Like it's there, right? And what I do with it is just say, I'm none of those things. And eventually, what I feel like, when I get further along in my healing journey, especially healing, the shame and healing my inner child work, I believe that a lot of those tapes will stop playing, and they won't play as often as they do. So I'm still working through a lot of stuff. So what I did was dissociated, and so it's easy for me to talk about my abuse, but I don't have any feelings on it, and that's the problem. So I can talk about my abuse, no problem. I can tell everybody, I can tell the whole world, obviously, about what happened to me as a child, but I can't feel it. I can't cry, I can't mourn, I can't grieve. I did that already. I did that 4 years ago. I cried for weeks and weeks and weeks, but I didn't cry. I wasn't crying for what I needed to cry for. And because my sweetheart is terminally ill, I've had to really maintain and be strong especially over this last 4 years. And so, for some reason, I just can't seem to get in touch with what I need to get in touch with as far as the feelings go, and grieve and mourn and whatnot. So I've got a few people thinking that I probably dissociated. And so, because that's generally what happens. I can talk about it, no problem. But then I can't grieve it. I can't let the emotions out, and that is kind of what keeps me trapped where I'm at in my healing journey. So I'm doing some work with EFT, and I'm also doing some work with emotional freedom technique, and I'm also looking at John Bradshaw's books, and John Bradshaw, Homecoming, and that's becoming. Reclaiming and healing your inner child, and also healing the shame that binds you. These are two books that I really wanted, and these are two books that I had been looking at for a long, long time. And so some of John Bradshaw's information is online here and there, and you can read some of it. And I'll tell you, I was looking through these books yesterday because I just got them. I had a gift card from my last place I worked, and I actually went and picked up these books with this gift card. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to afford them. And these books I started looking just through them. I didn't even start really going into the work in them. I mean, I just started looking through them, and I actually read a few pieces just here and there. And by the time I was done with that, about an hour later, I actually had a breakthrough on my on the issue of not being able to grieve and not being able to cry, not being able to mourn. And I actually started crying, and I allowed myself to cry as long as I needed to, which was amazing because I really haven't done that for a long time, and I need to, right? And so, these little things we can do for ourselves, to try to help ourselves get through this stuff. But I'm on my own doing this, but I know that I'm okay to do it. You know what I mean? Because I have never had anybody to support me. I've never, like, my sweetheart can't do it. You know what I mean? And even before, he was really kind of missing and absent from my life. So, he worked up north in the bush, and he'd be gone for like 8 months of the year. And that's why our relationship worked, right? This is why I choose these things, right? Because then I know, hey, well, if I don't like his attitude, I know he's gone for another 8 months. So he would go for like 2 months and be back for another 2 months, be back, sort of thing, right? He worked up north in like the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. And so, he'd come home and we'd all spend a few weeks together. It'd all be great, and then off he goes, and I would be happy because I'd be like, good, I don't have to deal with, the real relationship. So, now he's terminally ill, and we're stuck together, and so he can't be around stress. His nose starts to bleed, and he gets very, very sick. So I can't dump my healing journey on him. I really can't, and he can't even be a part of it because he knows he read my book. And I mean, he knows. We spent night after night with him holding me after the nightmares that I would have, and after these horrible scenarios would be playing over through my mind. And that was back when I was in my 30s, and he knows, right, the issues, and he's just like, I can't do it because it hurts me, because it hurt you. And he's like, and so when he gets mad and he thinks about the abuse that I've suffered, he actually gets like bloody noses and he starts bleeding through the mouth. So I can't do that to him, right? So I had to we didn't sit down and sort of draw up a charter. But what I did do is I realized that I was kind of in this on my own. And I really didn't want to do this to him. He's only got so much time left, and I thought, I don't want to kill him off here just because of my healing journey. So I keep myself very separate with this. And we just exist on another level, right? But he knows what I'm doing. He knows I'm doing the healing work, and he's happy for me. He knows I'm doing these shows, and he's happy for me because he knows it's what I want to do. It makes me feel better, so he's happy for me, obviously. And he wants me to keep writing. He says, "She's got to keep writing." I'm like, I know. So he's very supportive in a lot of areas. It's just that he can't hold me and hug me through the grieving and the wailing, and that's what a lot of people need. The crying and the grief and the sobbing and all that stuff. So I've been doing that on my own my whole life. That's what I mean. So even in this relationship, I'm still doing it by myself, right? So I'm okay to do it by myself. And if you're going to do this self-help type stuff and you're going to do this healing work, and you're listening and you're a survivor and you're thinking, I really want to get in touch with some of this stuff too, and and I want to do this self-help, you have to be really sure that you can do it. And you have to be really positive that you're not going to hurt yourself or somebody else, especially yourself, because many times survivors will just hurt themselves instead of somebody else. But, you don't want to hurt yourself or go backward in your healing journey because you're doing these things on your own. So make sure, like if you're the type of person who has to have someone there to hold you and hug you, don't do this stuff on your own because it's a lonely journey, really. But I'm thankful for the people that I have in my life. I've got some great friends, and these people don't even live anywhere near me. They call me almost every day. My own family doesn't give a shit, like whether I'm alive or dead. And I've got people that call me from Australia and the UK, and I got people that check in with me in the States every day because they care. And that's awesome. I consider them my family, and I have a new family now. A family that's good and decent and respects me and loves me and takes care of me, and so they don't live next door. Oh well, you know what I mean? It's just not the be all and end all, So make sure you find some good people. Surround yourself with good people, and don't just trust everybody, right? Some people are just not trustworthy. You can't. There's always this issue of trusting everybody, sort of thing. It's like no, but what we do have to do is use our gut instinct. But if we don't allow people in, it's a really sad, lonely place. And so we do have to kind of, if you think you like somebody and you think, oh, they look pretty trustworthy, you still have to know your boundaries, and you have to set those boundaries of what you're going to allow, what you're not going to allow in your life, right? So make sure you do that work first, you know. And I don't know, I just don't trust everybody because I know that everybody has the potential to hurt everybody, right? And so we really have to be careful who we let into our lives. And I would say, you know, choose wisely. Have some good people in your life, right? Who aren't going to hurt you, you know. And then, you know, if you don't have someone to talk to, you make sure you call a crisis line if you're on your own and there's nobody to talk to. You know, you can remain anonymous, but just phone in. You phone a crisis line, you can tell them what's going on, and most of those people are like you and me, right? They just want to help out, right? So have a great day, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. You know, I'll be back on tomorrow morning, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're going to look at that other section of this website here called, it's another page from Robert Burney called Codependence versus Counterdependence. So I really want to run through that because it looks very interesting and it looks like something that I think I'm doing. So have a great day, everybody. Take good care of yourselves. Talk to you soon.